Because sometimes I guess it's still a product of its culture, but sometimes I think a text can be created to be counter to the culture, which is still, more slightly agree, but not as strongly agree.
You always get the rebels.
And sometimes texts have no real value till people find them 100 years later. You see that a lot with artists, visual artists a lot as well. No one cares about their work in their heyday, but when you go back and look at it with a bit of perspective, suddenly it means more.
Yeah.
Probably still defined by the culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Counterculture is still
Slightly
defined by the
over,
culture.
but
Yeah, I'd argue that that's even more deliberately being a product of the culture because it's directly responding to it.
Yeah, it's significance is only found by the audience. No matter what the creator put into the text, once it's out, death of the author, once it's out there,
I don't
it'll be
believe
the
in
culture. I think. Really, you don't?
No.
I do. I think it's the audience will find its own meaning in the text. In that sense, and then that meaning will come from their culture. So it could be the same text with multiple different people finding different meaning in it just from their own situation and their own culture.
That's true, and in time, how those values change. So a text written 100 years ago might have different values and beliefs than one written yesterday. And the text that came to mind with the students yesterday were the cigarette ads, where the doctor's telling everyone to smoke Camel. They're the best cigarettes, apparently. And we go, oh my goodness. I have seen some ads from 20 years ago that just make my toes curl. I go, oh, we would have to say that? Publicly? Even if you thought it privately, wow, but I do like the way you're thinking there as well. If you want to break and challenge, I know that I respond very passionately to texts. I'm that person on Facebook and Twitter, and I go internally, how can you say that? How can that possibly make sense? And then I might go, have you ever thought about this side of things? Or I just go, close, just don't engage. But we do respond very passionately when our values are challenged or threatened. And yeah, that was also very quite a telling response to this particular sentence, and you'll find that with your students, they'll all come to a text with slightly different life experiences, and as a result, they'll react in different ways. And if you can get your students to reveal that side of themselves to you, it's a gift that you just never.
I think it's quite interesting. Counterculture is it's a little bit like troll culture. People go out there deliberately trying to provoke people. And I know some guys, all these army guys who, good guys, but online, they just enjoy provoking the
They
shit
grow
out of people.
horns and tails and really.
Yeah, and it's just sport and it's fun for them.
Really?
Yeah, and if you take it seriously, you get, but you just realise they're just laughing if you take it seriously.
That's good to know, because that actually takes away your anger, doesn't it? As soon as I hear you say that, I go, well, you're not going to catch me.
You still want to unfriend them on Facebook every 2 minutes, but
Yeah.
you're just having, okay, they're just being dicks.
Well, yeah, and there are agitators. Always will be agitators. And maybe that's a good thing, because how would a culture ever change if we didn't have some people there?
But often we think of counterculture as kind of a cool thing and a desirable thing.
Yeah,
But trolls are kind of counterculture and it's not cool, right?
There's a positive and a negative to everything.
I think often in this culture, trolls will be pushing an already dominant ideology. It's
Sometimes,
it's often already
yeah.
a mainstream, but they think they're counterculture, and it's you're not really. You're just pushing the the same thing.
Yeah.
It's
and that's when we get to go, you think it's
that's
so
when
cool.
you're kind of okay, that's not really.
and that's actually really sweet, isn't it? To know that the fall's on them, that the laugh's on them. Okay, and final one.
I take those you'd have to just develop a real attitude of inclusiveness. So when you're inviting people to talk about language who are learning about it, just be really open to the idea that you're not going to shut them down anywhere. You're just going to even if you hear something that you disagree with, you're going to find a way to accommodate that so that they're in the conversation until they can start to learn a bit more about other things.
And I think in our discipline that's one of the hardest things to do. I do know teachers who use the English classroom as a political pulpit and they just espouse their own political viewpoints. That's not what it's about. And I mean, if it's vile vitriol and it's, you know, it's spreading hate, then you'd shut it down. But people are allowed to think differently to you. That's a democracy, and that's sometimes hard for us, just because we're human beings.
So when they say talking about language, it's just like normal generic language.
So you're asking about this adjective here?
Or are you
talking
just
about-
just talking about language. So is that pointing into the representation's points of view, or is that for the special language?
Well, I guess it forms part of the special language because these are all words. I mean, for some people that's nonsensical rubbish. It's just academic language that has no meaning to them.
Because I was thinking like either like literature, or was it just like normal literacy? Or
Well, what do you think? How do you perceive your role as an English teacher? Do you think you're going to go into an English classroom and speak differently and use different language than you will if you go into your second?
yeah.
What do you think? Do you agree?
How do all, like for some of us, like our second is like new media, and that feels like a natural extension of English into that. But something like, say, geography, does that feel the same? Like, does English feel like an extension into geography, or is that a totally different thing?
I don't know, because the geography, there's so much content that you have to cover that. I mean, in some, like, you have to do like the peel paragraphs and all that sort of structure, but more so you focus on the content that you have to cover, because there's a lot. But
And it is
you
like
would take
it's
it,
defined.
you would still take it in there though, because I think that they are all linked. I don't know.
Yeah, that they don't exist in isolation.
Yeah.
But you would have special language for geography like cumulonimbus, and you would have your own discipline-specific language. That I would say that we as English teachers do too. We'll sometimes, there's always overlap, and I agree with you, we don't exist in isolation of each other. In fact, we shouldn't, because every subject, every syllabus rocks kind of in its own way. So what is particularly telling then about those statements is this. So philosophically, you actually align with this whole text in context ideology, which is probably a good thing. It doesn't, even if you're not aligning with what senior English privileges, context, genre, audience, purpose, doesn't mean you can't be an awesome teacher. In fact, sometimes a little bit of rebel in you is a good thing. But yeah, so thanks everyone. That's the value continuum, and it's a really good way to get students up out of the class and to be thinking deeply about ideas, especially in English classroom when you're really going into deep.
How do you do one of these? And I guess we've seen something like this last year. How do you do one where you actually get a genuine spread of things? Because typically it's a kind of question that everybody lines up one way. I haven't seen one of these once where it's like everybody's everywhere and they've got good reasons to be everywhere.
I can give you an example. You guys were different to yesterday's group. There was less agreement in yesterday's group than you guys. So you as interestingly, and it's your first teaching area, so you are actually really, really in line with the syllabus. They not so much. A lot actually and absolutely did agree, but there was a little bit more spread, a little bit more movement as each statement came up. An example I could give you where you get this really strong spread is when you've got really emotive issues that you want to discuss, like something like,
Do you believe in religion or something?
yeah, or something like, something I used one day and I'm a bit reluctant to mention it. It was something along the lines of, Uluru, Ayers Rock should always be referred to as Uluru. You know, those sort of things. Sometimes you'll get people spreading out.
My
Even
troll mate would have
Shakespeare.
loved that.
As well.
Shakespeare. Oh, and poetry. I
Mhm.
start every poetry with a value continuum, and the statement underneath it is, poetry is a valuable way to understand ourselves, or something like that. You just make it up, and it's so interesting because at the start of the unit, you'll get so many people disagreeing. They'll all be over here. Although you will get some kids who are in the neutral, and you'll get probably a handful of people who are here, but you'll get generally, depending on the year level, most people here. But if you do the same value continuum at the end of your poetry unit, you'll see this shift. And when that happens, you know you've done a mighty fine job of opening up that genre to them, making it more accessible and enabling them to really appreciate and understand it. So yeah, things like that are good examples. Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, so there's a post-workshop activity for you on Edmodo. I'm just drawing it to your attention here. Just to put it on your radar, basically, is to read the rationale for English. It's different for the other English syllabuses, and complete a quick activity on Edmodo. You might have already seen it up there, and I've added a couple of extension activities for those who are really keen. Because, as Andrew said, there are lots of syllabuses in the English suite. It's not just one. So how do we navigate that? The rationale in each one is different because each serves a particular purpose. And of course, the syllabus is a point of truth, more so than ever before. In the old system, you kind of worked to a work program. That's gone. Every teacher has a syllabus on their desk. Every teacher has the QCE and QCIE policy and procedures handbook. If you don't have a syllabus on your desk, get one. Make sure it's there, because it's amazing how many times you need to check something that you're thinking or doing. And again, those very important things that we need to always think about. So, looking at the most critical documents, what we're going to do now is how to read and interpret the suite of syllabuses. So, we do that through looking at sample assessment instruments and backward mapping. Say what? Backward mapping. Does anyone understand what backward mapping is? Yeah. Would one of you like to explain it to the group? Just have a crack at it.
What I know, it's starting from the assessment and then mapping out the content you're going to teach and the unit structure from that, so that you know that your students will have learned what they need to know for the assessment.
Perfect. Common sense, right? You just have to make sure you're not teaching to the test. So there are some parameters around that, but absolutely. I can't imagine that not happening, but then it must happen, because there are a lot of conversations about this backward mapping. In fact, the new system privileges the idea of backward mapping. Unit planning, TLAPs and your 21st century skills, we're going to unpack that. We're going to have a look at the structure of the syllabuses in a moment. We're going to look at formative and summative assessment, and we're going to drill down into syllabus objectives, but we're going to spend a little bit more time going even deeper next week into those. So, what I want you to do, you've got a choice here. You can come and grab paper copies of the syllabus. Actually, I'll bring them over. And or maybe have some online copies up on your laptops. So, we have here 2 paper copies of the English, 2 of the literature, 2 of the English as additional language, and funnily enough, 2 essential English syllabuses. So they're the 4 that I'm going to be talking about intermittently throughout the unit. And each of them serves a slightly different purpose. But what I want you to do is I want you to grab the English version, open the online one if you want to, or grab the paper copy. And I'm just going to give you a really quick rundown through the syllabus, through the contents page. So just open it up to the contents page, and you can see that you've got a course overview, you've got the introduction, you've got the rationale, and that's what that activity on Edmodo is. Then you've got the learning area structure, and then you've got the course structure. Underneath that you've got the teaching and learning, which includes the syllabus objectives. Now those syllabus objectives are the objectives used across the entire syllabus. Then you've got the underpinning factors, which includes literacy, numeracy and the 21st century skills. You've got a section on Aboriginal perspectives, Then you've got the pedagogical and conceptual framework, and then the subject matter. So that's all in teaching and learning. Then you've got some general information about assessment, formative units 1 and 2, which are very different to summative assessments, units 3 and 4. And the reporting standards, which you may have been involved with at your school in your last prac, and you may hear that term being bandied about in your next prac. But what's particularly important is that you've got Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4. And each unit has a title: Perspectives and Text, Text and Culture, Textual Connections, and Close Study of Literary Texts. You'll note that Unit 3 and Unit 4 are actually bigger than Unit 1 and Unit 2. There's a lot more in them, and that's because in Units 3 and Units 4, the syllabus tells us what we're going to do with students when it comes to assessment. That's not the case in Unit 1 and Unit 2, and I'll talk about the differences in a moment. But in Unit 3, you've got 2 topics. Topic 1, conversations about concepts. Topic 2, conversations about issues. So when teachers first saw that, they wanted to know what the difference was between a concept and an issue. So different assessments. And Unit 4, you've got again 2 topics. Topic 1, creative responses to literary texts, and Topic 2, critical responses to literary texts. If you have a look at Unit 4 just briefly, you've got 5.5.1, you've got the Summative Internal Assessment IA3, and you've got the EA. That is, those particular sections, we call them the specifications. The assessment specifications are where you'll go most of the time in your syllabus, because that's what gives you the detail about your assessment instruments. So that's a really rough overview, and the course content is the same in each of the syllabuses, but the content changes. All right, so here's a sample assessment instrument. Could you do it? IA1, Unit 3. Who feels pretty confident that they could actually do that right now? That's okay, because there's a lot happening in there, and that's governed by our objectives. So that's kind of the level that an assessment instrument could be pitched at. And this is an endorsed instrument. That means it does everything the syllabus requires. There's not a thing missing. And that's just a little bit of the end of it. I couldn't fit it on the one page. And again, you can see all these words, you know, we call that special language, representations, you'll see it everywhere. You've got the word concepts, which is in our objectives. Represented here again. Comparing and contrasting. Look, represented. Analysis. You've got developing your contention, position the audience. This is very important in our subject. And so on. Who thinks that they'd be able to actually teach students to do that? Give it a good hot crack, yeah? That's what your TLAP is going to be demonstrating for your assessment for this unit. Can you do that backward mapping? Can you say, okay, this is where the students have to get to. How do I make sure that you've got the skills? What is one of the key things that you'd be teaching if this was the task your head of department said, start of Unit 3, go. There's your assessment, go. Well, what do you reckon some of the key things you'd have to teach would be? Yeah.
Well, it really depends if they've experienced like journal writing before, like because that's the way they have to write in the genre. Sorry.
Yeah.
So if they weren't familiar with that, I would look up the conventions of journal article writing first and foremost.
You would teach it. You would hammer it. Yeah, you'd absolutely hammer it.
Well, I would definitely try and get it out of the way first, if they weren't familiar with it.
That's interesting too. You think that's really important, that's where you start, and that's absolutely fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's valid.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, obviously they need to be able to write it in the form of a journal article. What other things? Yep.
I'd probably start with getting them to engage with the text they need to read and making sure they're actually going to read that throughout the unit. Because I probably can't dedicate a lot of class time to just reading it out loud to them or having them read it in class. So you want to make sure, like, from the first moment they've got a reason to read, so that when I'm explaining things like genre and some of the concepts and the purpose and the audience, they have some point of reference that they've already conducted.
Yep. So they need to know the text, absolutely they do. And how are you going to break that down week by week by week? And that's the key thing. How are you going to get those students to read that novel?
A reading plan if possible.
A what?
A reading plan.
Yes.
So like be up to this chapter by then, that way I can suit the subject matter to the chapters they've read.
Do you know what I used to do? I used to allocate a chapter to every student at the start of the unit. You're doing chapter 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And we'd do it systematically throughout. That student would have to get up and talk about a representation, a perspective, aesthetic features. They'd talk about theme. I'd set up some specific questions and they would get up in front of the class and they would present. Not only that, I'd get them to do a thing link. If you haven't looked at thing link, oh my gosh, it is fantastic. It's a really good, IT that they can just choose a picture from Google Images that represents that chapter. So in 1984, it might be the Big Boot. And they get that image and then they put these little tabs all over it and then they answer the questions and they stand up here and they say, I chose this image because. And that way the students get this really nice visual snapshot of the focus of the chapter. And then they put their mouse over each of the little tabs they've added and they get to tell the students what's in that chapter. So at the very least, I know they've engaged with one chapter. And sometimes making students engage with one chapter is enough to get them curious about other chapters. The other thing I did with 1984, which was probably a little bit dangerous. Now, I'm very conscious of the time, I'm going to move on, but you can take some risks and do some experiential learning with your students if you want to. But I'll save that story for if we have time at the end. Really, really interesting, and you've got to be quite brave and prepared to take some risks to do what I did with my students.
Like lock one in a cupboard for 6 weeks.
I didn't do that. So you tee up, yes.
Oh, sorry. Would you ever dedicate any class time to just reading the text?
I never did.
Because on prac, that was what I saw happening. It was with younger grades, though. I think maybe with year 12, hopefully they can do it a bit more independently.
If you've got an essential English class, which we'll talk about, you might. If you've got year 10, year 9 students and you want them to get through a book, look, you know what? There's a lot of research backing the read aloud now across all year levels. Like it's a thing. And a year 12 colleague of mine, the year 12 teacher, at the end of the year, she asked her year 12s what they want to do in their final lesson, and she said they wanted her to sit there and read to them. Like there's this real joy in listening to someone else read, especially if you're a good reader and you're articulate and you're injecting expression into your voice. And with all the and with Audible now and all those e-readers and things, like it's a thing. But I never did because I never had time. I had to teach theme, concept, audience. I had to teach the novel. I had to give students practice, analysing, breaking apart. What is this simile doing in this text? How is it shaping a perspective? How is it positioning the audience? What emotion is that simile evoking? And that takes a lot of time, so I never had time to do that. And again, that's going to come down to your personal style, your philosophy, and it's going to come down to what your students need to get them there. And I guess that links to, you would have to make sure your students know what representation means, and I'd like you to give some thought to that. How would you teach that? That's a concept. It's invisible. You can't touch it. How are you going to explain that, describe that to your students? And you're going to teach them to analyse. You're going to have to discuss femininity and what that means. All these really deep concepts. You're going to have to talk about power. Yes! Power. Power, you know, too much power corrupts absolutely. Well, what is that quote? Power absolutely.
Absolute power
Corrupts absolutely. Awesome task. Very, very rich and allows you to go anywhere with it. And there's something else I was going to say. Dictatorial governments, totalitarianism. They're all concepts that you're going to be working through, and students will get that. They will. Yes. Amnesia TLAP, basically. But this is very important. And I'm going to talk a lot about objectives today, but we're going to do even more work on objectives next week. So let's have a look at the suite of syllabuses. They're on the desk. English, and you can see that I've even changed the icons, because if you can make meaning, then you take the opportunity to, I could have just left them as white circles. A book. Literature is kind of this ancient script, which is maybe even considered a bit misleading. It indicates that literature is high-end, I guess, highbrow and all literary, but that's not completely true. English is additional language, you know, syllabus of the people, and essentially you've got the really generic one, just a capital E. And then you've got English literature and extension, which I'm not going to talk about at all, we just don't have time for that, and a lot of schools don't run it. And the Australian curriculum helped us, or guided our writing of these syllabuses. So you can see that in English here I chose M&Ms because it really does cater for a wide range of students. And the reason it does is because in the English syllabus, students have to write persuasively, imaginatively, and analytically. One could even argue have the ability to compare and contrast. And you've got the prescribed text list sitting under here. So you would choose English if you feel comfortable writing in that many different styles, or producing work in that many different styles. Literature, you've got yin and yang here. Again, you've got the prescribed text list, which is different to the one for English. Heart of Darkness is on the literature one. So is Charles Dickens. I didn't just do that. Some people love him. Oh. I would never jump for joy if the head of department told me I had to teach that text, but I would make it work. I'd bring it to life somehow. So prescribed text, yin and yang. So with the literature syllabus, it's for those students who have looked at the prescribed text list, and they get some of those texts and they're excited about reading some of those texts. There are more texts required to be studied in the literature syllabus, 6 versus 4 in English. But the major difference is that in the literature syllabus, students only write imaginatively or analytically. That's it. So you want students who can write stories, monologues, that sort of thing. You want students who can actually really enjoy analysing.
Do they have to do literature and English?
No, they can.
Just literature.
You'll go out there and some schools won't run English, they'll do literature only. You'll go to some schools and they'll have English, literature and even essential English. A lot of schools are running English and essential English. I know there's a school in Toowoomba that is running literature with 3 kids. Why is the head of department doing that?
I did not know that. They were 2 different things.
Yeah. So, this particular head of department has chosen to run literature with only 3 students because he wants the syllabus demand to grow. He wants more students to study it. How do you do that? You get the word out there through the students who are studying it and loving it, that it's an awesome syllabus. So numbers will grow. So it's a marketing campaign. That's costing that particular school because they've got a teacher there for 3 students. But that's just a by the by. So you'll get a whole range of combinations in schools. You can't have any set preconceptions. It also means you need to be flexible because you don't know which syllabus you're going to be given necessarily to teach. English is additional language, prescribed text, the same one as English. Anyone here with an English as additional language background or knows people who have? this actually sparked a lot of conversation in yesterday's tube. This is why it's really good to have a read of the rationales on each of the syllabuses, because the English as an additional language syllabus is designed to cater for students that rate at level 5 on the band scales. If you don't know what I'm talking about, okay? If you haven't done the English as additional language unit that's compulsory yet, that's why you will become familiar with it. So when you do that compulsory unit, just remember the EAL syllabus was designed to cater for students who are at that level and above. So if you've got students who are not at that level, that syllabus might not be the best one for them.
So is it similar objectives, but just like a bit more scaffolding with that?
You're going to answer that question in a moment.
Right.
I'm going to give you something to do. Really good question. I can see that you're thinking deeply about how the syllabuses are structured. So, prescribed text lists. If you have them, or if you've printed them out, or you've downloaded them on your laptop, you will refer to them constantly. They're the same. English and EAL are the same. Literature text incorporates some very different types of texts. I mean, English has Macbeth on it, for example, which is one of the most commonly used texts in Queensland, which is an awesome text. Who wants to teach Macbeth? Hello? 2? 3?
Oh.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh, so much
something
fun.
about that they retire 25% of the reading list every 3 years.
Yeah.
Who makes that call?
Oh. Well, that's a political decision, isn't it?
Because like
Which
it's pretty big
text
call
go?
that like knock off Macbeth, so right.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The idea behind that is to be responsive to students' needs and schools' needs. So if, for example, Cat's Eye, which is a new text a lot of schools haven't chosen because it's too risky, there's not enough information out there at the moment for them to feel comfortable doing for the external assessment. If no schools take that up for external assessment, then at the end of the 3 years we might retire that and put a different text in its place. And in terms of who makes that decision, well, QCAA make that decision, but they don't do it by themselves. They consult academics, librarians, students, you name it, they're consulted.
So it's not like a list where the bottom thing drops off. It's a specific, like so Macbeth might never drop off.
Potentially. That's in a new space and time. I guess decisions will be made when we get there, because it'll be happening for the first time in a year or two. 20, I don't know.
So they've got some good books on there, like McGahn is not an obvious one, but that it's on there. I wonder how long that would last.
Yeah, yep. And even though, because the prescribed text list is split into external assessment and poetry and prose and film, and there has been some criticism of the prescribed text list, but how can you cater for everyone? We did our best. Yep.
So how do they make the choice for the external assessment? So do the schools get to choose the text and it'll just be the question or whatever they're writing?
Yeah.
Okay, so
So
that will still be individualized from schools. It won't be the same text every school.
Some schools will choose Macbeth, some might do Cat's Eye, some might do We're All Completely Beside Ourselves, some might do, I don't know, 1984 I think is on there. Yeah.
Where do you find the time to read these books before you teach?
What a mighty fine question. I'd like that to be now.
Do you just dedicate time to read the entire book, or are there ways to, I guess, summarize it somewhere else so that you can? I don't know. I just feel like I never have time to read.
I've done all sorts of things. When I drive from Brisbane to Sydney, I'll buy it. I'll buy the book, and I'll play it through Audible
Oh,
for
okay.
10 hours.
Yeah.
Or if I can't sleep at night, I'll go. Okay. Problem with that is that you often fall asleep, so you miss your chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know where you actually fell asleep. So it's a little bit it's a bit annoying. There are so many different ways to do it. Look, I don't think you need to know every book in the prescribed text list, but you probably should know a little bit about some of them.
Mm-hmm.
I actually read all the EA texts first, because they're very privileged texts, and if you don't know which one you're going to get necessarily, so it's just nice. And if you're a good reader and you've chosen this as your first teaching area, I imagine you can scan pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I would scan, long we did descriptive passages, I'd go, I don't need to know. I don't need to read 5 pages about that leaf or that hill or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you just get very, very, very clever and creative about the way you do it. But if you are teaching a text, you need to really dissect
Yeah.
and really go deeply into it.
Audible's really good. Like once you get into that, you suddenly make use of all your driving time and all your exercise time and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've got a 1-year-old, so
Ah.
yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. It's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And every teacher's different. I didn't like to teach a novel without having read it at least once first.
Yeah.
But sometimes the nature of the beast is you've got no choice.
Mm-hmm.
You're told you're teaching this next week, and you've just got to go, okay. And that's where you've got to be smart and get your students to do the work, not you do all the work for them.
Yeah, because even in school, like I would read Spark Notes and still get A+ somehow.
There's nothing wrong with those, and I think in a lot of ways they are beneficial to teachers. They really do take the meaty parts, really important parts. But I do like deconstructing texts. It's a lot of fun. Who likes deconstructing texts? Breaking down the aesthetic features and saying, this is manipulating me to feel love or rage or to accept the ideology of, and I resist or I accept, it's that sort of thing. So 3 of you like deconstructing texts. Yeah?
I love reading if I have the time.
Yeah.
Like on a plane or something, it's nice.
Yep.
I just don't have the time.
Essential English, I'm very passionate about this syllabus because they're those students who are potentially disengaged, have struggles reading, writing maybe. They need us more, I always say, than a lot of other kids, because we make the difference in their lives. Certainly for at least the first few years, 5 years after school. No prescribed text list. And it's a very different syllabus. It's pegged at ACSF level 3, that's the Australian Core Skills Framework. All you need to know about that is that the country decided, got some experts together and worked out what level was the level that enabled people to be functional in society, that is hold jobs and be productive, and it's level 3. And if you want to know what that is, then you can go and look it up. But it's reading, writing, speaking and listening. No surprise there. And this syllabus is geared for those students. Having said that, it does count towards your ATAR. Students just need to make sure that they know what the prerequisites are that the university requires. Because if the university requires English and they've done essential English, they're not going to get into the course if they want to. So they just need to be mindful. It can count towards their ATAR. So I don't know, maybe there are some courses, maybe we will have some physics and chemistry kids that are really top notch and they don't want to study Shakespeare and they don't want to do this heavy deconstructive work. Essential English might be the one for them, depending on what their university course requires.
So you'll never get a kid doing essential English in English or essential English in literature.
Not really. What you do see though, it's a good question, is students who are doing English as additional language, they might be doing that syllabus and they might do essential English and they might do the short course on literacy as well. And you might actually have some schools where students are studying English and literature, and even English, literature and extension, depending on what they've decided to offer. So you can have students completely immersed in the English space, which one could argue, is that a good thing or not? It's an individual.
Because I know when I was still at school, it was English and English extension. Like that was the option. So why is there still an extension if literature exists?
Because
What was the
literature
space literature was filling?
Literature is, so all those syllabuses on the table that we've talked about so far are 4 units, extension is 2 units, and it's only for Year 12.
Gotcha.
Units 3 and Units 4, and you can't do extension unless you're doing literature or English as a precursor. There are strict rules around that, so extension is elite.
So do they have to drop a subject?
Depends on the school. A lot of students will do that after school. They seriously stay after school to do it.
Yeah, that was the same at my school. English extension was they had to stay after school before school.
I was in English extension and I didn't.
Yeah, depends on the school.
Mm.
I was talking to a teacher
Just on
just 2
every
days ago.
recruitment.
It was
And she was still at work at like 5:30 in the afternoon because she'd just finished a literature English extension class. We were talking about her assessments but that hadn't been endorsed. We were talking it through. So, how the syllabus governs assessment. So we've got formative, Unit 1, Unit 2,